Jenny Pinault. Apologies if I mispronounce your name. A little bit of a background on Jenny. Jenny's an advocate and blogger on 45enode.ca. Member of the Family Advisory Committee of Veterans Affairs, she received the Ombudsman's Veterans Commendation in 2016. She is dedicated to raising the awareness through her speeches, conferences, and blogs. Her recent 6 months cross-country tour made her understand the challenges experienced by military families. Thank you very much, Jenny. So if you may, please step up.
Thank you. I'm sorry, I didn't get to print all of my speech before I came, so I'm going to have to read it from my laptop. And I have to tell you that it's absolutely the first time that I will read a speech. Usually, I talk with my heart, but talking about the political situation of caregivers of veterans with PTSD is absolutely complex. So in fact, in the next few minutes, I will share with you only the tip of the iceberg. It will require me 15 hours to draw a complete picture of our situation. And after my presentation, please feel free to ask me to elaborate if you wish me to. I would like to start by sharing with you that I chose to speak in English today, although I am perfectly aware that I could have done the same in French. My stubbornness to do so is, in fact, a strong symbolism of my experience. Between French and English, you say the same thing, but you express it very differently. And from a cultural perspective, the province of Quebec has a much different perspective and interest for the political situation of caregivers of veterans with PTSD. In other words, in my world, French is my emotional language, but English is my political one. So that explains why in the next hour, you will hear my terrible accent and the many mistakes of all kinds that I'm about to make. I'm telling you this because sometimes I think I also use words that actually don't exist in an English dictionary. So please, if it's the case and I sound like an alien to you, stop me and ask me to rephrase. Thank you for your presence, but also for your interest in the political situation of caregivers of veterans with PTSD. It's important for me to be heard because every time one of us talks about caregiving of a veteran with PTSD or any other wound for that matter, she also talks for all of us. It's kind of a one for all and all for one, I think. I have to say that each of our individual and collective efforts is important because we need a few changes to happen. The past few years taught me that a change doesn't happen overnight. For a change to happen, first you need time, a lot of time. The necessary time to create a political empathy that I could describe as an interest and a will to provide a proper social environment for a change to become a reality. But it seems like in order to generate the political interest and will, you also need to have the media attention and the research to support the subject. On top of it, for a change to happen and for it to be real and effective, you mostly need the financial resources to support it. But it's so much more than politics and money. A change comes from the heart of a country. For a change to happen, it must make sense to the majority, as a wounded veteran, as a family member, but also to everyone who is part of a system supposedly to be there for us. For anyone dealing with us and being in a position where either they become part of the solution or part of the problem, they all must be properly educated at every level. From the receptionist working at Veterans Affairs, to the psychiatrist at the local hospital's emergency, to the local president of UN, NATO, the Legions, and any organization supporting the veterans, to any mental health professional who comes in contact with us. It's a huge objective and a complex task indeed. Good news is that for the Canadian caregivers of veterans with PTSD, a change process is actually taking place. The secret is to understand that it's done one person at a time, one day at a time, and one opportunity at a time. In my advocacy world, I also add, and one battle at a time. Meanwhile, each day brings more suffering to many of us. The misunderstanding of our reality can lead to tragic events that should never ever take place. Who will ever be able to forget the tragedy the Desmond family has suffered last January in Nova Scotia? Last year in Quebec only, I believe it's close to 20 serving members and veterans who committed suicide. 2 months ago, I was informed that a caregiver hung herself in the garage. In my world, changes never come quickly enough, as time is a silent killer. My name is Jenny Mignot, and I guess now would be a good time to introduce myself. I have to be honest, I never know how to do it properly. And this is the part that I hate so much because I feel like I'm sharing with you a personal resume, but also it's also a necessity for you to understand the perspective of the person who's talking to you. I'm not the only vet spouse and caregiver advocating for better services and politics. In the past few years, caregivers have become more publicly outspoken about their challenges, their needs, and their reality. Many became advocates and are promoting a cause they came to embrace through their own process. Medical cannabis, PTSD, caregiving, neurofeedback, mefloquine, etc. Our collective determination to improve the system, no matter at what level, is nothing new. Back in the 80s, a few military spouses who, because of their tremendous determination, succeeded at creating the organizations we know today as the MFRCs, Military Family Resource Centers, a network of independent organizations from coast to coast. Its mandate is to support the military and the veterans' families. So the nature of our battle has nothing to do with modern feminism, but rather with our quest at being empowered in a period of need. As I go, I will share with you some elements that will make you see a little bit more about my personal story and situation, but you must know that I'm not a specialist at anything. I don't have any titles other than a vet spouse and a caregiver of a veteran with PTSD. And that's why it's so important for me to have the pink hair, the fancy nails, because I am the result of both the system and the challenges I was confronted with. My battle is all about our identity and our dignity. My mission, who started exclusively for the sake of my own family, has turned me into an advocate, just like many others in this country. Advocate for what? Well, it depends who you talk to. The Globe and Mail referred to me as an advocate for all veterans. On the Hill, and as a member of the Family Advisory Committee of Veterans Affairs, I am an advocate for caregivers of veterans with PTSD. Sometimes also I am referred as an advocate for families. And in Quebec, I'm not seen as an advocate. In fact, there is no French word for advocate and advocacy. But I am known as a blogger for 45nord.ca, so that's a military website. My contribution to our cause is mostly political. To English veterans, I am the vet spouse who ran after Minister Fantino in 2014 in front of the TV, for which Châtelaine considered me to one of the most 5 Canadian women who impacted the result of the last election, and this one I was very proud of. From the moment of my chase, the opportunities to talk never stopped from presenting themselves. Since then, I met with 3 different Veterans Affairs ministers, and I expect to meet a 4th one very soon, close to 200 members of parliament individually. I also had the privilege to be one of the first who talked to the entire NDP at their caucus. I met and dealt with a few number of people at the National Defense Headquarters. I testified on 3 occasions at the VA Parliamentary Committee and once at the subcommittee of the Senate. I recorded videos and written blogs to caregivers, both in French and English. I took part of a few studies from the University of Halifax, another one from Calgary. I give conferences and speeches about PTSD, trying to educate and raise the awareness. And when it comes to caregivers, excuse my expression, but I'm an ass kicker. If you need the Kleenex and tell me you don't understand why all this is happening to you, I will tell you it's normal, but go to a peer support, go get help, because I'm an ass kicker. I will give you tools in order to understand the reality you live in. When I can help, I help. It's my advocacy. Sometimes in the name of a veteran or a serving member, sometimes in the name of an entire community. And last year, I felt privileged to be awarded with the commendation of the Veterans Ombudsman. All this may sound very good, but to me it's absolutely nothing except for the credentials I've developed. And that is only on a very personal level, because in the end, nothing has changed really. Too many veterans are still committing suicide, too many couples are still divorcing, too many children are still impacted. In fact, no matter what I did and what I do, it brought new changes for me as a caregiver of a veteran with PTSD who was really struggling. More than 18 months ago, my ex-husband and I announced the end of our marriage as the result of the abandonment of the system towards my ex-husband first and myself as a spouse and as his caregiver. Not to mention that my chase and everything that followed impacted our lives seriously, his PTSD on top of everything else. The irony is that in the end of our marriage, he was becoming the man I always knew he was during our 15 years of marriage, thanks to medical cannabis, who freed me from my fear of him committing suicide. In our case, the changes in him happened too late for me. He supported me the best he could, including financially, but it wasn't enough. When I left, I had no home, and I was financially very vulnerable. I ended up living in a car instead of asking welfare, because to me it was, I couldn't accept leaving a system with Veterans Affairs and going to another prison, that is the provincial prison of the welfare system. So I decided to go and travel this country in order to meet those who I got to know on social media and supported me all these years. For 6 months, from Newfoundland to BC, I met peer support groups, alternative resources, members of parliaments in their own constituency, organizations related to veterans, families, service dogs, medical cannabis, you name it. I also met with many families, caregivers, serving members victims of their JPSU, the Joint Personal Support Unit, related to the military, and veterans. Most importantly, I met the forgotten of the forgotten, the children who from a young age, 11, 12, 13 years old, are caregiver of a wounded veteran. Those 6 months were personally challenging, but also very educational in terms of my Canadian, as a Quebecer, perspective and understanding of our global situation. If I can talk to you today, it's because of 2 wonderful veterans with PTSD in my life to whom I am profoundly grateful. I am referring to my ex-husband, who he was supposed to be here today, and I said, oh no, there's going to be nobody anyway listening to me, so don't bother to come. That's why my boyfriend is taking me, for him to see my speech. But I owe him my financial support, and he's allowing me a financial independence regarding my own expenses. And also, my boyfriend, who is right here, Orlando, who is compensating when I cannot do more than I can. They believe in my battle, in my message, and in my advocacy, and without them, I would have to be busy earning a paycheck somewhere, and I wouldn't be here, although I am impacted from my years of caregiving. Why am I telling you this? Because the battle of caregivers is a quest for, I said it, our identity and our dignity. And it's about three simple, distinct elements. The education we need regarding the care of a wound, the significant support, significant, meaningful support, because there's always plenty of people to be there for you, but if they don't understand your reality, whatever they're going to be saying won't make any sense. So, the significant support we require for us and the children, psychologists, alternative resources, peer support groups, organizations, to prevent the family from becoming a collateral damage or at least to lower the impacts. And finally, it's also through our recognition, such as receiving a financial compensation when we have to quit our job to be present for a wounded veteran. But recognition also means seeing us as part of his reality, as we have the ability, and that is important, and the power to be his best ally or his worst enemy. We can create damage, we can create miracles. From my perspective, the real challenge is to make us an investment rather than a public burden. The longer we feel and are abandoned, thicker become the walls of our fortress in which we isolate ourselves, thus allowing the collateral damage to take place. Yet, every organization, the Canadian Armed Forces, Veterans Affairs, the Legions, the MFRCs, the OSI clinics, the JPSU, Military Family Services, everybody loves our serving members, the veterans and their family, and everybody is trying to convince everybody that all the services are available and efficient. Are they? Answering this question from a political perspective is not easy. Let's start with the beginning. There are approximately 800,000 veterans in Canada, and roughly 200,000 are dealing with Veterans Affairs. My question to you is, how many Canadians could be considered as a caregiver of a wounded or an aging veteran? Politically speaking, nobody knows the answer, and trust me, nobody wants to know the answer. Why? It's all a matter of money. So, let's start at the beginning. We become caregiver of a veteran who was, at one point, a serving member. So, it all starts with the Canadian Armed Forces, who is certainly both its own victim and its own enemy because of its very specific organizational culture and the nature of the global human experience serving members are exposed to. My contacts with military and veterans across the country made me realize only a very, very small portion of everything we, as civilians, know nothing about. Their service. We don't know what they know and what they are conscious of in terms of the public misinformation, for instance. We don't know what they have done. Some sworn secrecy, they will never talk about certain events. And we don't know what they had to do. We don't know the true environment they worked in. For instance, the availability of munitions, the content of their ration bags. Do you know that the little bread is used to constipate in a war zone? The safety, the availability, the functioning, the comfort, and the efficiency of the material, vehicles, and weapons they are using, pills they are given. Most of us don't realize the true nature of the sacrifice of a soldier. Yet, all soldiers become at one point, veterans. But before they do, when they become ill or injured, they deal with the JPSU, the Joint Personal Support Unit, the section of the Canadian Armed Forces unit taking care of them. No matter how you want to look at it, in my reality, the Canadian Armed Forces is the absolute ground zero of the suffering of an individual and his family, present and future. It's the one who determines in what condition they will allow a soldier to become a veteran, and thus the weight that we'll have to carry is caregiver. It's no secret that the JPSU has been heavily criticized since 2008. Over the past years, numerous occasions, except in Quebec, it's important to say it, the media have talked about reports indicating the challenges experienced by the unit, the unavailability of the services and the waiting list, the difficulty to provide French services in some bases, and more importantly, their misunderstanding of the suffering of one of their own. In fact, the real tragedy is the misunderstanding of the JPSU for their own brothers and sisters in arms who became ill and injured. Let me help you understand my point by describing very quickly a common situation. Imagine a soldier who served twice in Afghanistan. I met serving members who had 11 missions, 11. That's huge. So his culture demands from him a certain resistance to admitting that something is wrong. Usually they will resist as long as they can for many reasons, but their suffering will become more and more evident. It's felt at home first because this is the place where they can let go of their anger more freely. Then something happens, a separation, a fight, an accident. They will eventually ask for help and will try to minimize the symptoms to protect the career and their reputations. They will see quickly a psychiatrist who will feed them with numerous pills of all kinds. Numerous. I'm talking men to whom we give 20, 30 pills a day. I mean, they become zombie. And yet, they're going to be asked to be present at the base at 7:30 for their PT. Guess who has to wake them up in the morning after the sleeping pills have been swallowed at midnight? They might have to wait a few months before they actually receive a diagnosis, and chances are, the diagnosis will be most likely related to, and this is real, anxiety from the childhood. And they will be told that very minimum is related to their service. They will receive a liberation date and will be pressured to go back to school and to find a job. Go, go, go. They will be misinformed and absolutely confused regarding their financial future. They might wait a few months before they have to see a psychologist. The therapy won't make sense to them. They will keep lying. Meantime, they will drink, play poker, use drugs to numb their pain. They will need to feel the adrenaline and will go to the extreme. They will eventually receive a lump sum for a small portion of their anxiety that they will spend within a few weeks, few months. Just recently, I met someone who spent $32,000 within 5 weeks. Just like the vet spouses and caregivers of veterans, the military spouses and caregivers are also suffering from their lack of identity. For instance, specific services, for example, hours of babysitting, can be offered to an ill-serving member only if he is single. If you have a spouse, forget it. And although the JPSU has a responsibility of supporting the family, once again, It's difficult for a family to receive the services they need if the diagnosis of the serving member doesn't make sense. Or it's difficult for a family member to be heard when they call for help. In fact, in many cases, they will end up calling the military police with the only objective for their serving member to receive help. Any kind of help. They want the man they want soon to be back. Think about what the wound really means into their home. It's made of nightmares. I mean, terrible nightmares. Anger, social anxiety, panic attacks, paranoia, hypervigilance, dissociation. He becomes non-functioning, emotionally distant, controlling. He spends all day, all night playing video games, stuck in his own darkness. And in the process of his treatments and services he will receive, it's more than possible that the spouse may never be included, consulted, and considered. The wound is physically invisible, and so are the family members. Time is a silent killer. Talking about military families and their specific military environment of caregiving would require another hour together. But the Canadian Armed Forces will try to be very reassuring by showing us a booklet of listing of the numerous programs and services available included in the Military Family Services Program, supposedly delivered locally by one of the 32 Military Family Resource Centers. Once again, the question is, are the programs available and accessible? The answer is, it depends. It depends of a number of because of a numerous number of factors. Military caregivers are privileged to have access to their MFRC for support and services, but it would be a false statement to say that the programs are offered and accessible. Let's not forget that the MFRCs also experience their own challenges in their service delivery. For instance, I was recently involved in supporting a group of Francophone military spouses to receive better services in French in an MFRC in the Atlantic. It's important to mention that the Canadian Armed Forces is an important key player of the chessboard representing the caregivers of veterans. In the end, it is the institution who determines the condition of a freshly new veteran. He is the result of what it has decided for him during his services and during his passage at the JPSU. The combination is what we will have to deal with eventually as a caregiver of a veteran. In fact, the divorce rate being high in the military, it's no surprise that in many cases, many caregivers are the second marriage, and it doesn't mean that they are as informed about the system the same way a military spouses can be. Caregivers of veterans certainly don't form a community the same way the military caregivers do. Another key player of the chessboard are the political parties and the way they choose to make us victim or not with their political love for the veterans and their families. Let me remind you that in 2006, a new system was imposed to veterans going to the Pension Act to the new Veteran Charter. Among the important new changes, let's mention the elimination of the lifetime pension for veterans, replaced by lump sums, and the elimination of the place of the family. It is so important to say that many veterans are being massively failed by the delay, deny, and die of Veterans Affairs. And sometimes, political love is full of venom. Medical cannabis is such a great example. Now, since 2008, medical cannabis has been reimbursed to veterans just like the regular, just like pills. And I don't want to get into the details of the industry, I would need another hour, but let me assure you about the fact that for many veterans, medical cannabis is a game changer. It allows them to free themselves from the pills, allowing them to feel emotions. The therapy starts to make sense, they sleep better, and they don't stay in a zombie state for hours. It's not for everyone, but I came to strongly believe in its therapeutic effects. For years, Everybody was aware about the lack of Canadian research to support it. Until last November, a veteran could be prescribed and reinforced 10 grams a day. That may seem a lot to you, but if you transform it into edibles, oil, and so on, it's just like maple syrup. Okay? You need sort of 7 liters of maple water to turn it into one single liter of syrup. Last November, Minister Her announced, among other measures related to medical cannabis, the new limit of reimbursement to be set at 3 grams. Once they are freed from the pills, no veterans wants to go back from them because the side effects are creating way more damages. I know spouses who were absolutely clear that if he would get back on pills, they would be leaving the marriage. Meanwhile, they pay the missing amount of medical cannabis from their own pocket. We are the collateral damage of the mistreatment of our veterans. Just like veterans, caregivers are political issues used to win votes. My meeting with members of parliament taught me that they too need to be educated about the veterans and their families of their own constituency. But political love is filled with a desire to look good in the media. I had the proof when, at the end of June 2014, 1 month following my chase, the assistant of Minister Fantino informed me that a new measure would soon become available for tired little caregivers just like me. Announced in March 2015 by Minister O'Toole, because Mr. Fantino was gone, the political answer to the media impact related to my chase was the Caregiver Relief Benefit, a $7,238 grant giving to the veteran for him to get the services he needs while his caregiver takes a needed break. It was announced to be available to 75 out of 200,000 clients of Veterans Affairs. 75 most ill and injured, whatever that means, of veterans of this country. The most ridiculous measure you could think of. In fact, the only benefit was and still is financial. And other than that, it's a perfect example of what political love and political misunderstanding can do. What does the caregiver ask? When it comes to the caregiver relief benefit, nothing, again. The veteran is the one who has to ask for it. The veteran is the one who receives the money. And do you really believe that a veteran with PTSD will welcome a stranger in his house to cook supper for him? While she's away, how many phone calls will have to be exchanged between them, and how many situations will have to be dealt over the phone? When you are a caregiver of a veteran with PTSD, it's you and nobody else, except maybe for the children. Although initially available for 75 veterans, it's now close to 200 who are benefiting from the Caregiver Relief Benefit. But up to this day, I still am contacted by families who don't understand why they are being denied. And this is how you create a big amount of frustration. Another great example of the misunderstanding of PTSD and the lack of recognition of caregivers is when our presence is needed to accompany a veteran through a medical appointment. Why is it that anybody could drive him to the doctor, wait for him, and at the end of the day, be financially compensated through VAC up to $130 a day? Anybody except who? Except the family members, the most significant person for a wounded veteran. When a spouse can keep a job, chances are that at one point, her paycheck will be impacted because of the few hours she has to accompany him there and that. It's never ending. And not only will she likely more confronted to people who won't understand why she has to leave again, but the impact of her paycheck will impact the whole family. and explain to me how a veteran can feel good and be positive about his treatment if it means for him penalizing those he wants to take care of. When I had to quit my job because my place was at home, I lost my identity in this society. I lost my dignity. And I lost my own capability as a mother to financially take care of my own children. When I had to quit my job, he is the one who ended up assuming alone the financial responsibility of his wife and the 4 children we had between us. If education, support, and recognition are essentials, it's for one reason. Our real battle, the most exhausting one, is beside the veteran who is fighting for his own quality of life. On a day-to-day basis, dealing with the mental health issues related to the military is already demanding and requires a lot of love. And we also end up filling the numerous, inconsistent, and ridiculous forms of all kinds, dealing with the case manager, going through the Veterans Review and Appeal Board, and wait, and wait, and wait. Time is such a silent killer. No wonder we suffer too of the brown envelope syndrome too. No wonder that today, when I see a medical prescription, just a piece of paper, I really become really anxious. My ex-husband saw a psychiatrist every 6 weeks for 7 years. And every 6 weeks, he would come back with a new prescription. A little bit more of this, a little bit less of that, 1 bit of pills here. And for 6 years, 6 years, I was never asked how was the adjustment to medication was going. And I've seen like terrible things. Obviously, it hasn't been easy for all of us. And again, I was never included in that process. And one of the aspects that is still unrecognized is the true extent of the damage we suffer from. I am referring to the vicarious trauma, compassion fatigue, if you want, the transfer of the PTSD on the family members. More and more, actually, caregivers are receiving such diagnosis with a certain relief, I have to say, because at one point, you wonder if you are crazy yourself. But where do we go with a diagnosis of compassion fatigue, of a caregiver of a military and PTSD, whatever, okay, whatever. There's not much people available for us. An important gap concerns the services provided to caregivers after the end of a relationship, no matter what the motive is. Because we have no identity outside the veteran, and all the help we receive is going through the veteran himself and accessible through him, we have no resources available to us. Except, okay, in this country, like a few case managers who will have some kind of empathy and authorized psychological support, but at one point we become even more nothing, going back to the civilian life. If you are a veteran and become vulnerable, chances are you might have access to immediate resources coming, from example, from organizations such as Vets Canada, who will help provide the safety of a roof and proper support with Veterans Affairs. The Legions will probably be able to support. Case managers will offer the mental health needed, detox, etc. But if you are a caregiver, had to quit your jobs a few years ago, chances are you will end up like many of us. Most of the time, it means going back with the children to mom and dad's place until a court decides in the middle of the ugliness what justice is in terms of money. Well, that's why I ended up in a car. I know you can't tell today because a few months after that, I took approximately 30 pounds. So I don't look like it, but believe me, I had no other choice because there was no other organization existing for people like me. My ex-husband and I, unlike the vast majority we know, are the living proof that it doesn't have to turn out. One of the aspects that we are victims from is the fact that we live also in a very big and diverse country. Although the federal politic is impacting our lives, sometimes the will to help is there, but not the local resources. So depending on where you live, you might have access to resources that you won't find anywhere else. Just think about the accessibility and the availability to doctors and mental health professionals from one province to another, which is absolutely different. I also have to say a few words about the caregivers of Quebec, who live an entire different cultural reality. To begin with, from my experience, Quebec is the Canadian province who feels the less empathy for their serving members. Empathy and respect, I should say. A Quebecer, a civilian, doesn't know what to say to a veteran. Thank you for your service is something they don't hear very often, except when serving members are involved in helping during natural disasters, like recently the floods we had in Quebec. As a vet spouse in Quebec and as a caregiver, we are less than nothing. This is why I always said that it's the rest of Canada that made me a vet spouse. I believe on January 25, 2016, 2 articles were published about military suicide. One in La Presse and the other one in the Ottawa Citizen. Have a look at them. In English, we talk about the JPSU, General Vance, the National Defense Ombudsman, Gary Walburn. The suicide is talked about, but the article also pinpoints the players, those who have power. In French, the opinion of a university teacher is asked. There is a comparison between the civilian statistics, but nobody is mentioned. It's like, let's talk about pain, but let's not talk about the political responsibility. This is a fact, and I can feel it in the interviews I'm giving. So in English, I'm asked for my political opinion, but in French, it's always like 90% of the time, tell me what it's like to live with a veteran with PTSD. What is PTSD? And we start like, it's a crying session. That's really the difference between Quebec and the rest of Canada. How much do you think that impacts the nature of the services we receive in Quebec at every level? From our kid social worker to our psychologist to anyone, to them, being a vet spouse means nothing. So they have no knowledge of our reality and our challenges. Military PTSD means nothing. So what we are being told doesn't really make sense. In fact, it's really creating even more problems, and it's isolating us more than in the rest of Canada, I feel. The very last thing I'd like to talk about is, in fact, overall, I know that we are in a change process. Things are improving on many levels. This is the part where I didn't finish my speech, and I'm going to sort of improvise because I feel comfortable talking about it. There are some changes, and it's important to talk about them. First of all, politically speaking, we are making progress. There's the creation of the Veterans Affairs Family Advisory Committee, which is actually, to me, meaningful, effective, sort of, but the big win, the recent big win is the replacement of the caregiver relief benefit that will be replaced next April, and it means that the caregivers will be able to receive a monthly $1,000 check to their names. And this is a huge game changer in terms of security. Okay, in what I see, that money given directly to the caregiver, and I have to say, it's not a compensation. Okay, they call it a recognition. Well, we have to start somewhere, and this is a great start. Now, of course, the real question is, Since we don't know how many caregivers, I mean, can we afford it? I'll be honest with you, I don't think we can. So once again, people will be denied. The criteria will be more likely based on physical wounds. PTSD is always a problem. The misunderstanding really affects the entire system at every level. But from an identity and dignity perspective, it's a great beginning. Also, more online tools are being elaborated and directed to military PTSD, which is also great. More inclusion, from instance, the OSI clinic, operational stress injuries clinics that are all over this country. More and more they are including the spouses, the caregivers. They are offering, little workshops, and here and there they are included in some workshops, which is making a huge difference. There's more research also. People want to know a little bit more about us. Still not enough, but every time somebody does have an interest and create either a research, I feel like it's helping our entire cause. And also, there's more empathy from local organizations in general. For instance, I can also refer to the new accessibility of the MFRCs. Although I have to say that many caregivers of veterans, well, the veterans in fact, like to live in the countryside, far away from the neighbors and want to be alone. So, the MFRCs are not accessible to everybody. But it's a great start also. They are opening their doors to new veterans and to wounded veterans, also families. So, we are becoming more powerful as a collectivity. It's like holistic for us, our families, and most importantly, our veterans. After all, we are all fighting the same battle, only from a different perspective. That's all I have to say.
Thank you very much.
I'd like to ask, does anyone have a question, comment? No? No question, no comments. It's all good.
Maybe some people will stage fright, so to speak. They may approach you afterwards. But on behalf of CMHA and everybody here at this session, we'd like to thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Your story, your personal experience, thank you for sharing it. It's very powerful nonetheless. So.
It was a privilege. Thank you.
Thank you, Lord.